Hello everyone, welcome back to another special video we are doing here on Dan Skip's Allen channel. And in this episode we will be talking about once again one of the 52 essential films and why they matter, specifically from our perspective. But we are getting all of these wonderful films from a list in this book here that is put out by Turner Classic Movies, and we are specifically doing these videos to honor the late great Robert Osborne, who was a longtime host and really a champion of the love of classic film. So for this episode, we are talking about one of the quintessential film noirs, and that is Double Indemnity, directed by Billy Wilder, starring Fred MacMurray, Barbara Stanwyck, Edward G. Robinson. This film came out in 1944, and it is considered one of the early film noirs, one of the staples of the genre. Classic film noir, or the film noir that a lot of people are most familiar with, basically extends from around 1940 with films like The Maltese Falcon and extend all the way to Orson Welles' Touch of Evil in 1958. And in post-film noir, we have a lot of what we like to call neo-noirs and a lot of other off-brand genres ever since. The film noir style or genre really exists all the way to today. It's a genre that's been used throughout the decades, but really it is in its best form, in my opinion, in the classic era, specifically with films like Double Indemnity. And this is a film that I had seen many, many years ago. I had been exposed to it in a film course, and I wasn't really aware of film noir up until about, I would say, 7 or 8 years ago. And this is one of the best of all time. But I know my buddy Steven here, this is a relatively new film in his film viewing history. So I'll let him kind of talk about what he thinks and, of course, introduce himself.
Yeah, hello, everybody. I'm Stephen Billings, here to do another video on the 52 must-see movies. And this was one that Andrew introduced me to some months back ago, and because he knew that I also was a big fan of the film noir genre. And yes, this has become one of my favorites. I completely agree with Andrew that this is definitely the best time period for film noir. A lot of great film noirs came out in this time period, and this is one that is in the book and is on the list, and it's a must-see. Yeah, let's not take too long. Let's get into this. I guess we'll be starting off with why we think it's essential, I guess.
Yeah, why we think it's essential. But like I said, it is the film noir of film noirs, if you will. It's got all of the usual tropes that we see, and it's one thing that's interesting about film noir is there's really no set definition for it. It's really kind of open to interpretation, but there are usual staples that we see in it, and it's all in Double Indemnity. For those of you not familiar with this film series, we will be spoiling the heck out of this movie, so definitely watch it before you watch this video, or if you don't care, then of course you don't care about spoilers. But this film is all about the character Walter Neff, played by Fred MacMurray, and he is an insurance salesman. He sells life insurance, house insurance, car insurance, whatever. And one day he goes to renew a policy at the home of where Barbara Stanwyck lives, a character of Phyllis Dietrichson. And in this film, and she has this kind of idea that she is going to have her husband sign this gigantic life insurance policy that he's not going to be aware of, and she's going to get Fred MacMurray to kill him so that she can collect on this and they can live presumably happily ever after. It's a very dark, very cynical film from a thematic perspective. It deals with a lot of kind of sultry things at the time, which kind of makes it very much groundbreaking for 1940s cinema, because you don't really see this type of stuff, specifically in the post-code era. For those of you not familiar, there's pre-code and post-code, and then we get to the MPAA, which we have now. But in this post-code era, you couldn't have overt sexual things. You couldn't have like infidelity or things like that. And this film delves into all of that stuff, all this sex and violence. And why I think it's so important is because it's very much groundbreaking, and also because out of all the film noirs, I find it to be engrossing and rewatchable, and it's also kind of a mixture of, I would say, kind of, um, you have that early kind of gangster feel almost, because when you introduced Edward G. Robinson, who is so used to who was so used to seeing in these 1930s gangster pictures like Little Caesar and all this kind of stuff, and he's delivering the dialogue very fast, very quick, very just very speedily. And that's very much something from back then. But then you're roping in all of these film noir motifs, so it's such an awesome blend of generations of filmmaking. Steven, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh no, you just said every. No, I'm just kidding. Um, no, one of the big things I think is an important quality of this is this. If you want to get into some of the best directors of all time, Billy Wilder is that, and I think a lot of what makes this film as great as it is his writing. Not only his direction, but his writing. Him and I don't remember who he co-wrote it with, but the dialogue and everything like that is very, very much, because a lot of the thing, when I was getting into classic films, one of my big things is the dialogue and the acting, feels dated in certain films. But this film, Billy Wilder has this quality about his writing that seems way ahead of its time, I think.
Yeah.
And I think he definitely, and there's a sense of humor that really is ahead of its time too, that plays into this darkness that's running through the whole movie. And I think that, also one of the big things that stood out to me is kind of, first of all, the playing with time a little bit, where our film starts off at the end,
Yes.
And you can see the picture behind me. This is literally the beginning shot of the movie. Starts off kind of, a lot of time you get that, one of the staples of film noir is that narration. And in this case, the narration is not like, you don't get it. It's not just some voice you hear and you don't know where it's coming from. This tells you that, story, and you're going back and watching it. And I think that, some of that, something new, I think, I mean, it might not be, but I'm pretty sure it's kind of like a new way of doing that.
Yeah, it's actually been used not only in like the classic film noir, but they've used it in modern films. I mean, it happens a lot where something where we start the movie basically at the end and we are given all of the lead up to the end. It's very interesting how it's done in this film because we don't know anything. All we know is there's this guy sitting at a microphone talking to someone that we're not even been introduced to yet. He's talking to Edward G. Robinson's character. And something that is unique to film noir is the narration. I mean, it's used in so many of them. What is interesting, though, is that this film is not so much a detective story, which you see in a lot of film noirs. It's almost like it's more of a character-driven film, but it has but does have investigative kind of things in it. You're almost viewing it you're viewing events from the perspective of someone committing a crime as opposed to somebody trying to find out who did the crime.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. I was going to say that's one of the other very unique things about the film is that, typically we're getting the point of view of the people that are trying to, it's always about the mystery. It's about the investigation. And in this case, we don't need that investigation. It's more about the anxiety and stress that builds up between the two main characters because they think that they're going to get founded out. And it turns it on its head. It turns the genre on its head. Another reason why it's a very essential film, and it's why it's in this book and on the list.
Yeah, and also, I just want to touch on a little bit of the aesthetics of film noir, especially the classic era, like we're talking about. Is things are always typically set at night. They're set indoors. It's always dark, and there's always a lot of shadows. And if you notice in this film, there's always a lot of shadows. And one of the quintessential shots of film noir is there will be light coming through window blinds, and they will reflect on a wall or on a person. You could see the mixture of shadow and light, because a lot of things in film noir are very murky. You know what I mean? There's a lot of gray area. You would say in this film there is really no fully good person in it. Fred McMurray's character, I guess you could say, starts out as a good guy, but gets kind of seduced to do a very dark thing, commit murder. And you could kind of say, and also the business that he's in, the insurance business, is also kind of a murky gray area insurance business, because there is one scene in the film where there's this guy in Edward G. Robinson's office, and he's trying to file a claim about his truck that burned down. And Edward G. Robinson's whole idea is to prove that these claims are false. You know what I mean? Kind of depriving people of money, or people who look like they desperately need it. And also, that's kind of what insurance companies do in general, is look for ways to not pay people out these through these insurance policies. And it's really interesting how murky all the themes are. And just touching on another main thing is the femme fatale. The femme fatale here, played by Barbara Stanwyck, who's got to be one of the best femme fatales like ever on screen. I
Yeah,
mean,
I would say one of my favorite, probably my favorite scene of the movie is when they are in the car and on their way to the train station, and the main guy, the insurance salesman guy, uses the chloroform on him to knock him out, I guess. And you don't even see it happen. Her face and hear him struggle, and you just see her face kind of give that smirk.
what is interesting, I'm not sure chloroform. I think he strangles him from the back seat.
Oh, did he strangle him?
That's what I think, because like the whole idea is to dump the body on the train tracks, and pretend
the thing
that
is
it's Fred McMurray.
If that's the case, then it's so smartly planned out. The only thing about having it be a strangle is that it would leave evidence of a strangle.
Yeah, that's true. Depending on how you do it. I mean, if you smother him, then you won't leave any handprints or stuff like that. I'm not quite sure how well like fingerprinting and DNA testing was done back then, but it's not like the way it is today, where you would see Fred McMurray's fingerprints all over that car, and people would be like, "Man, there was a third person here. We may want to investigate this." But it's also interesting. There are some looks that Barbara Stanwyck gives in this film to Fred McMurray. If you just watch some of their scenes together, just pay attention to her face, and she gives these kind of evil, seductress looks. Like it's evil and both seducing at the same time, and it's kind of astonishing how she's able to pull that off. Seemingly because she's playing a much wider game than Fred McMurray's character knows about. You know what I mean? She's playing a game. She's not only playing him, she's playing her husband, she's playing the insurance company, and she has this kind of I think like love affair on the side with another guy. It's very interesting how this film plays off how much she is in the background pulling these strings. And it's also kind of the quintessential femme fatale type manner. She's always thinking about herself. She's always thinking 10 steps ahead of everybody. And in the end, she gets her comeuppance, but so does Fred McMurray, who is complicit in her acts.
Yeah, and I wonder if that plan they first met, because obviously showed his first met, all this wordplay of I'm perfume, you're gonna be the same sexy girl as you were when I met you today, basically. And when he comes back, and it's like, so I think then that's when she knew what she needed to do, was that she obviously had this guy on the hook.
Oh yeah, I think she was looking for a sucker, and she found one. I mean, right away when she appears on screen for the first time, she's like right out of the bathtub, right out of the shower. She's only dressed in a towel, and I think there's a lot of shots of her that start at her feet and work their way up. Kind of the full body shot, almost a POV shot from Fred McMurray's perspective, and from the perspective of a male audience, kind of ogling her in a way. That's the one thing with these femme fatales. They were kind of these male fantasies that also ended up being their worst nightmares.
Yep.
And there's also that famous scene with the anklet, where Ed Fred McMurray's kind of drawn to the anklet that's around her ankle, and showing off legs in a sexual manner is something they really didn't do in films a lot at the time. So it's very much breaking the barriers of what type of sexy stuff you can do on screen. Like you said, Stephen, with the dialogue, kind of all of these sexual innuendos that if you watch the movie from today, you can pick out very easily because it's very overt. It's very obvious, this attraction they have with one another, to a certain extent. We know her real intentions behind everything, but from his perspective, it's very very sexual. And it's also interesting how after the deed is done, the murder of her husband, their relationship doesn't go in a very good way. You know what I mean? It's interesting. It's kind of almost like that whole like secrecy is gone. What really made their love affair kind of attractive is no longer there. That's when things kind of fall apart, which is in the second half of this film. It's a really interesting plot from that perspective, how you see almost the rise and fall of this man and this woman's relationship, but it's also the rise and fall of their lives, essentially. I mean, the weird thing
Because
that
getting to the end, they both basically turn on each other. He goes to kind of confront her because it's just falling apart. G. Robinson, Edward G. Robinson's character, who is my favorite actor in the movie. His acting is fantastic, as this kind of mentor character that's his boss. And he's just awesome, man. He's just flying. He's got these really great lines, and he's like going through his theories about how this all went down. And he's on it, man. I thought his performance in the movie was fantastic. And
Oh yeah, he's given some of the best dialogue in the film. What is interesting, initially he
yeah,
didn't want to do the movie because he wasn't going to get top billing. He's not the main character, and apparently, ever since the early 1930s, or all the way up to this film, he'd always been the main character in a movie. And now he kind of had to realize that my career is kind of going on in years. I'm older. I'm not going to be the top flight man anymore. And also from a casting perspective, Fred McMurray is an interesting casting because he is someone who is not really deemed a character actor who does dark things like murder and love affairs and things like that. He was mostly a comedic actor, so it's very much casting against type. I know Fred McMurray as the father in that old TV series My Three Sons. So I've always had this kind of fatherly kind of view of him, and now I'm seeing him in this movie, be very dark and very conniving and things like that. It's a completely different feeling. And also Edward G. Robinson, there's this one scene where they meet kind of the head of the insurance agency. It's after the fact, and the guy's like, "Oh, why did we do this? Why did we do that?" And you can tell that Edward G. Robinson just playing with him. He's just letting him have what he's saying. Then he completely just tells him off in a really smart way. It's a great scene. And yeah, like you said, Stephen, by the end of this movie, there was really no way out for the Fred McMurray character. He was gonna go to the police anyway. I kind of assume that he died in the end. I mean, we really don't see what happens to him. I know he says he's going to make his great escape, but he's been bleeding out for this entire movie.
oh
You
yeah.
know?
Well, yeah, they have a scene where he goes in to confront her, and she shoots him because she thinks he's about to try to hurt her, kill her, and he's like, is that the best you can do? Comes close. She doesn't shoot him a second time because she says that, I can. I for some reason I couldn't, and then he decides to shoot her twice in the stomach. I'm pretty sure, point blank, which there was no blood, which is always kind of funny in some of these old movies. You don't see a lot of blood.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then then we finally catch up with the beginning of the film where on the story recording it, and as he turns around and his boss has already kind of heard all he needed to hear, and you know, he decides to ask for help, say, hey, give me a head start. He's like, you're bleeding out. And
Yeah,
he
like you're not
just
gonna make it to the elevator, you know?
yeah. And I love the last moments of this movie where his character never has a way to light his cigars, and suddenly his character he can't get to his light, he can't do it himself, he's hurting, and then he lights the cigarette for him, you know, and he's like, I love you too, you know, and that's there too, some dark humor in there, you know. It's a really good ending to a dark movie, you know. I say with a lot of great movies, even when they're dark, they need some comedic moments to offset it, because you need to move your emotions up and down to really get a good reaction out of people.
Yeah, a lot of those came from Edward G. Robinson. Like every scene he's in, he steals for both the comedy and the dialogue, like we've already said. But yeah, that ending is rather ambiguous whether he survives or not. I mean, I kind of assume he dies. I mean,
I assume he dies too, probably before the cops get there. In a way, though, I kind of hope, being that he's the conniving guy he is, that he gets put in jail. But back then, you know, I'm sure the response time was pretty bad. So he probably died, because he'd been, remember, he had to walk all the way from her place all the way to that place.
Well, he drove. He drove, because remember at the beginning when he's driving the car like all over the road.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think he probably died before they got there.
I like to think that too, just because that seems to be a running theme throughout film noir, is that you go down this dark path and you end up paying for it with your life. You know, things come at you, things you can't control, and things slip off to the point where you're dead. I mean, and that just seems such a fitting end for this film, where you can't help your inner fantasies or your inner wants. Like, he wanted Barbara Stanwyck so bad that he was willing to commit murder for it. And then when things weren't what they appeared to be, he committed murder again just to get away out of it. It seems like committing murder is the way to both get the things you want and fix the things you hate.
It's a slippery slope. I haven't done it yet, but I'm hoping not to.
I hope not either. But this is like we've said, a great film noir. The screenplay writer you were looking for is Raymond Chandler, who had written a whole bunch of detective books. Specifically, his most famous is The Big Sleep, with the famous character Philip Marlowe, who's been portrayed by Humphrey Bogart. He's been portrayed by Robert Mitchum. He's been portrayed a couple of times. So it's very interesting that they got a detective writer to co-write a film noir. Also, apparently, this film was kind of in and out of production, or it was first thought about in the mid 1930s, but they could never work their way around the sexual stuff that I've mentioned in it. Apparently, the novel that the film is based on is way more sexual than what was shown on screen. So they had to finally figure out a screenplay that would be submitted to the Hays Code board that would get approved. Because back then, like I mentioned earlier, this is post-code. Basically, the Hays Code was put in to kind of stop all the stuff that was happening in films before. If you're really interested in the Hays Code, it's outdated now. No one uses it, but you can go and read all the stipulations online. They're ridiculous by today's standards. Basically, the Hays Code was implemented in around 1933, 34, and they got rid of it in 66, and they put in the MPAA, and we have, the R ratings, the PG ratings, everything that we all know now. But it's interesting that it took so long for this film to get made, and I'm glad that it was, because it's an essential film that you need to watch if you are a film noir fan, if you're just a fan of film in general, I definitely highly recommend it. It does have some old kind of motifs that Steven has brought up, like with the blood and things like that, that they couldn't get away with. But it is one of my favorite film noirs. I'm not quite sure if it's my favorite. I'd have to really think about it. But how about you, Steven? Considering this is a new film for you.
You know, I mean, you've introduced me to a lot, and then there's a lot that I've already seen. I'll have to say, out of all the ones off the top of my head that I would say I actually enjoyed the most is probably Laura. I think I really like Laura the most. But yeah, this is definitely like a top 10, definitely of film noirs for me. And I guess getting into the closing of this, I have this Blu-ray. You know, we're talking about this book, you know, and Robert Osborne himself actually does an introduction in this Blu-ray to this movie. So get this to check that out. He does a good introduction to the movie, and yeah, it's fitting because this book has got a is why we're doing this list, you know, and you should check it out. It's definitely worth buying.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen, because we are doing this for Robert Osborne, is that he actually does have an intro both on the DVD and the Blu-ray, which is kind of says everything you need to know. If he loved the movie, you know it was an essential classic film. But yeah, I highly recommend picking up the Blu-ray, the DVD, whichever way you can watch it. Please watch it because it's a great film.
Very affordable. It's like $10.
Yeah, it's very affordable and definitely well worth it. But this has been our newest episode, if you want to call it, of the 52 films, 52 essential films and why they matter, based on this book here. If you want to check out the whole list, definitely pick up the book, read the articles. They're great. And we will be doing a lot more of these in the coming weeks, in the coming months. You know, there are 52 of these videos we have to do, so there's going to be a lot more stuff for us. But, Steven, if there's anything you want to plug where people can find you, please do that now.
You can find me on Film Club Central. We do the Film Club movie show. And, yeah, we do reviews. We do some other things. So just find that out.
Yes, and for me, you can find me on Twitter at Cabzilla06, as well as my YouTube channel, Cabzilla Productions, where I do movie reviews and all that kind of stuff. So please give me and Steven all of your support. We definitely appreciate anything we can get.
Yes, and also Dan Skip Allen.
Dan Skip Allen, fearless leader Dan Skip Allen, the mastermind behind this series. Definitely give him a watch here on his channel.